This video explains the law applying to educational settings, which makes sure that pupils with a disability can access equal opportunities to learn, enjoy, and achieve. This recording will go through the definition of disability under the Equality Act of 2010 and explain which settings the law applies to from slide 3. We'll look at the 3 different types of discrimination according to the Equality Act from slide 6. We explain what's known as the reasonable adjustments duty from slide 12, and what to do if you have concerns about equal opportunities for your child from slide 19. We have created timestamps under the description of this video on YouTube, so that if you want to watch only part of this video again, you can click on a particular section and it will open at that point. The Equality Act of 2010 brought together different laws which cover discrimination. Disability is one of the 9 characteristics protected by the law, so that disabled people get the same opportunities as non-disabled people and do not experience discrimination. According to the Act, a person is disabled if they have a physical or mental impairment which has a long-term and substantial adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. The definition is designed to be as broad as possible, and there is a wide variety of conditions that will be covered. There is no need for a child or young person to have a medically diagnosed cause for their condition. What matters is the effect their condition has on them. We have a separate video called What is a Disability According to the Equality Act, which looks at this definition in more detail. The Equality Act applies to all nurseries and schools, including academies and free schools. It applies to post-16 institutions, universities and employers, and it applies to service providers like local authorities and private education settings. All aspects of studying are covered, including admissions and the provision of education. This includes not only classwork, but timetabling, school and field trips, homework, after-school clubs and societies. In effect, the whole of school life. The Act also covers access to any benefit, facility or service, and exclusions. This doesn't mean that a disabled pupil can never be excluded. The Act ensures that education providers cannot exclude a student or terminate their studies because of their disability. Under the Equality Act, nurseries, schools and post-16 institutions must not directly discriminate against disabled children or young people. Direct discrimination is treating a disabled pupil less favourably because they are disabled. Let's look at an example. A pupil with a hearing impairment is not permitted to go on a trip to see a Shakespeare play, although she would like to. Staff decide that she will get more from watching a subtitled filmed version of the play in school instead. In this example, it is because of the child's disability that the school decides she will not go on the trip. This is likely to be direct discrimination, even if the school considers that they are acting in the child's best interests. Under the Equality Act, there is no justification for direct discrimination. According to the Act, nurseries, schools and post-16 institutions must not indirectly discriminate against disabled children or young people. Indirect discrimination is applying a provision, criterion or practice that puts a disabled pupil at a disadvantage compared with someone else who is not disabled. Let's look at another example. A secondary academy requires all pupils to wear the school uniform from a specified provider. A pupil has severe eczema, which is made worse by the particular fabric used in the uniform trousers. An educational setting could discriminate if they apply a blanket policy, that means a policy that is applied in the same way for everyone, if the policy puts a disabled pupil at a particular disadvantage. A setting does not have to change their overall policy for non-disabled students, but the Equality Act would expect them to make reasonable adjustments to the policy for a disabled pupil. Nurseries, schools and post-16 settings also must not discriminate for a reason arising in consequence of a child or young person's disability. This means that they must not treat a disabled pupil unfavourably because of something connected to their disability, such as needing time off for medical appointments. This applies if the education provider knows of the child's disability or ought reasonably to have known. Settings are expected to take reasonable steps to find out if a pupil is disabled. This might include careful observations of progress and behaviour, and talking to parents or carers, and to the child or young person themselves. Let's consider a couple of examples here. A private nursery refuses to give a place to a little boy because he is not toilet trained. His parents have told them that he isn't toilet trained because he has Hirschsprung's disease, but they still refuse to give him a place. The toileting issue arises from the disability, and the nursery was aware of the disability, so this is likely to be discrimination arising from the little boy's disability. In another example, a post-16 disabled student has a number of absences due to anxiety and depression. The college takes action to terminate his studies as he has taken off more days than allowed in a term. The college should be recording disability-related absences separately. The action to exclude is due to absence related to the student's disability, so this is likely to be discrimination arising from disability. Where something a setting does might put a disabled child at a substantial disadvantage compared with other children who are not disabled, the setting must take reasonable steps to avoid that disadvantage. This is usually referred to as the reasonable adjustments duty. It is a continuing duty. This means it is not a one-off or once and forever duty. Adjustments will need to be kept under review, and over time they may need to be changed. Failure to make reasonable adjustments is another type of discrimination. The reasonable adjustments duty is anticipatory. This means it requires settings to think ahead, to anticipate where disadvantage may arise, and put adjustments in place to prevent this happening. It is good practice for educational settings to involve parents and pupils in planning reasonable adjustments. Sometimes settings may need to call on specialist advice, but most reasonable adjustments consist of changes to policies and practices which often cost little or nothing and can be relatively easy to implement. Let's look at a few examples of common reasonable adjustments. On a residential trip, a pupil with sensory needs can take meals in a separate room with a small group of friends, rather than in a large busy cafeteria. A secondary school organises for a subject usually taught upstairs to be taught on the ground floor to enable access for a pupil in a wheelchair. A student with medical needs is able to take an exam at home or have a delayed start to the exam. And a pupil with chronic fatigue is given a buddy to carry school books, and the school policy adjusted so that she will not be penalised for arriving late. The Equality and Human Rights Commission has produced detailed guidance for schools about reasonable adjustments. You can download this for free if you'd like to. It includes lots of examples which you may find helpful. The reasonable adjustments duty applies to the provision of auxiliary aids and services. An example of an auxiliary aid could be a recording device or a step enabling a pupil with restricted growth syndrome to reach a science lab desk. An example of a service might be for a school to train a teaching assistant to provide specific medical support for a pupil. The duty also applies to procedures, criteria and practices. This covers all arrangements, policies and procedures, including a school's behavioural or sanctions policy, their uniform policy, procedures for exclusions, and for school outings and residential trips. For nurseries which are not part of schools, and for post-16 providers, the reasonable adjustments duty includes alterations to physical features. This might involve removing a physical feature, altering it, or finding a reasonable way of avoiding it, like using a different entrance, or providing a ramp, or changing around the use of rooms inside a building. Schools instead have a duty to publish an accessibility plan on their website. The accessibility plan must set out how the school plans to increase the disabled pupils' access to the curriculum, the physical environment, and to any information shared in school or on their website. This is a tool for you and your child to use. So, for example, if your child is about to start a new school, we would recommend that you look at the new school's accessibility plan to help build your overall understanding and to support your discussions at a transition meeting. Where a child or young person has a disability and also a special educational need, or SEN, the SEN code states that reasonable adjustments and access arrangements should be considered as part of SEN planning and review. If you're not sure about how this works, we have a video explaining the process of SEN support and how you and your child are involved, and more information on our Suffolk SENDIAS website. Each term, we also offer free information sessions for parents and carers in Suffolk explaining SEN support. If you have concerns about equal opportunities for your child, we would recommend that you first approach the educational setting to explain these. It is possible that staff have not got the full picture of how your child's disability impacts on their ability to take part in school life. If you are still unhappy, you could follow the setting's complaint procedures through writing to the head or principal and the responsible governing body or committee. In your complaint, it's important to explain what type of disability discrimination you believe has taken place and what action you think the school should take to remedy it. Our SENDIAS service could help you with wording this and support you with working with school to resolve your issues. If things are not resolved, you could choose to escalate the complaint to the Department for Education and Ofsted, or you could decide to bring a claim to the SEND Tribunal. Bear in mind, however, that discrimination claims are backwards looking. They focus on a past event of discrimination rather than looking forward to what support is needed. While the SEND Tribunal can order reasonable adjustments to be made, if your main aim is to get better support for your child, you may like to contact our impartial SENDIAS service to explore options and support you in working with school. However, if you do decide to make a claim to the SEND Tribunal, our service can support you with this too. Do look at our SENDIAS website to find further relevant information and answers to frequently asked questions, and explore our Suffolk SENDIAS YouTube channel to find more videos, for example, explaining the definition of disability in detail, and the process of educational support for pupils with medical conditions or with special educational needs, or SEN. This video was made by Suffolk SENDIAS, but every county has an impartial and confidential SEND information, advice and support service.